Okay, what we're going to do now is some channeling, and just a few things I'd like to say while Mary's sort of just relaxing a bit, is that firstly the spirit atmosphere here is very busy and very pushy actually as well. So Mary's going to have to just wade through that in order to find the people we would like to talk to. And secondly, it's not a show we're doing here. It's something Mary and I do every day. We talk to our spirit friends usually every day. For us, it's just a normal fact of life that we get to talk to all of our friends. You know, otherwise we'd miss them a lot, right? So we talk to all of our friends, even those that have passed while we've met them in this life. We talk to them as well, but also all the people we've met historically, we talk to as well. And so for us, it's a real joy to be able to do mediumship, and also a joy to have time with our different spirit friends. But also, we also do a lot of mediumship where we help spirits as well. But what we were thinking today is that for the sake of those of you yesterday who were particularly challenged with the idea that there's no reincarnation, you remember those of you who felt that challenge? What we wanted to do today is talk to a spirit who believed in reincarnation when he was on Earth, and then only learnt that reincarnation wasn't possible in the spirit world. And we would like to hear from him about why. You remember how we talked about decisions just now, and those principles of love, truth, humility, and faith. We want to see from him how the principles that are taught associated with reincarnation don't match up with those qualities. So we would like to hear from him about those things. So
well, I'm going to let you speak with him.
Yeah, I'll
so
speak
rather
with
than
him.
preempt too much about what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, and I'm just going to close my eyes so I'm not hooking into you guys. So, yeah. Hello, thanks for having me.
Pleasure. It's a pleasure. Maybe first off, just for the sake of introduction, we can find out where you lived when you were on Earth and a few of those kind of details. How long ago that was and things like that.
Sure. So I should say we're old friends. But I lived on Earth about 1,000 years ago, thereabouts, in the continent of India, in the northern part, really. The landscape and the delineation of borders was different then, but in that region.
So near the Himalayas?
Yeah. My name on Earth was Netir. Yeah. And I was of the Hindu faith when I lived on Earth. Yeah. But of course you want to hear about my story, and so...
yeah, of course we've heard your story many times, but if we, mostly for the sake of our audience, and also for the spirits around our audience who are also, still flirting with the ideas of reincarnation and things like that, it'd be nice to hear your experience from yourself rather than from us. Yeah.
Sure. So when I lived on Earth, I was a family man, and I was of a class that meant that I lived fairly well compared to many of the other people in my society. And I wasn't a particularly old man, but nor a particularly young man. I was around 63 when I passed, and I fully expected to reincarnate.
Why was that?
Because that had been a part of my upbringing since I was born. It was something that was accepted all around me by everyone, absolutely everyone, that we would live again on Earth according to the life that we had lived. The conditions that we returned to the Earth would be according to the life that we lived while we were consciously aware of our life as we were living it. And after we died, then there would be a process and we would return to another body in potentially a better class or a lower class.
And that class differential depended upon?
The life that I lived.
Yeah. So it's more like, I suppose, what they now classify as karma.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And so when I passed, I had a lot of expectations, actually. I didn't really fear my death as much as I thought that I had lived well, and so therefore things would go well.
So you're looking forward to your next life on Earth, were you?
Yeah. Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose...
Because you thought you'd done well in this one.
Yes.
So.
I was quite arrogant about the situation at the time, but of course I didn't realise that at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I felt I was quite a good and humble man in the life that I had lived.
Yeah.
And so when I reached the spirit world, the spirit life, when I transitioned or left my body, there wasn't a sense of dread. But soon after I arrived, things didn't go as I had anticipated that they would.
So now you've got the audience wanting to know why that's the case. Yeah.
Well, I was really expecting something almost mystical or quite organised, that I would go through a process, that I would understand even more things, and that I would be introduced to my next existence, and then I would enter that. And what actually happened was that I was aware that I left my physical body. I was aware that there was some transition that had happened, that I couldn't return, and I wasn't really interested in returning to my physical body. But then I seemed to arrive in a place that was very dark, as in not like a night scene, like a night scene around me, and that it didn't seem that I was being stepped through an organised process that I had anticipated happening.
So it was almost like you felt like, I've arrived in this no man's land.
Exactly.
And what do I do now?
It felt very sort of empty in a way, sort of, and without...
Could you see outlines of things, like buildings and other things?
Yeah, not so much buildings, it was more like being in a place of sort of like a wasteland. There was rocks and the outlines of trees, but I couldn't see anyone for quite some time. I suppose
because it's so dark too, you can't really see colour.
No.
Not much colour.
It really actually resembled the sort of like the barren mountains that I had grown up around. Or that these mountains were barren. But sort of resembled the landscape of my childhood, I suppose. But there was no life and no inhabitants, it seemed initially. No colour. And I sort of really felt very lost and confused. And I suppose more than anything, I felt that there was an emptiness. And I mean that not just in a practical, physical sense. I felt a sense of emptiness inside that I wasn't anticipating. I wasn't... I was expecting really something very quite organised to happen. and to sort of be...
Did you feel that there would be people organising that for you, or just an organised process that the universe had organised for you, or what was your general thinking?
So I wouldn't have called it people,
Mm-hmm.
but I would have called it, I suppose, the universal powers, gods, who would help me through that process. That's what I thought would happen, and I thought I would be met in that passing, and that
Sort of welcomed.
yes, and that they would sort of, I suppose, if I'm very honest, I felt there would be some honour, some recognition, and
your good life.
yes,
Yeah.
and some acknowledgement from these gods that I'd worshipped, and that I would be told what would happen next,
Yeah.
or guided as to what would happen next. But I had sort of a strong kind of idea of what that would be like, an impression emotionally, I suppose, is an anticipation, and then it didn't happen. And so instead I felt this empty, just like a space inside of me that I had never realised was there, it was hard for me to understand, is that this feeling of the space that I'm in, or a feeling in me, because very quickly it felt like the space that I was in felt like the feeling in me, or it was like I became engrossed in the feeling of the space, or maybe the space was reflecting the feeling of me. It was very different to what I expected, and very difficult to understand.
And you now know all about what the reason why that occurred, but at the time you would have been totally confused about the reason.
Yeah. And I became quite angry, actually, quickly. I felt increasingly sad, and then I became angry, and I began to demand answers of really the space around me, because there was no one around me. Yes, yes. And I really raged at the gods, and I raged about, of course, even at the time I wouldn't have called it rage, I would have called it, just demanding answers. But in hindsight, again, I can see it was a lot of rage.
And mostly because of the unfulfilled expectation.
Yes. Yeah, so I remained in that state for what seemed like a very long time.
Do you know now how long it was?
It wasn't actually that long. As you know, also time is measured a little differently. But if I had to estimate, it was maybe 2 or 3 months. Yeah. And then I suppose at that point I began to think, well, nothing is coming to me. I'm going to have to try to figure some things out for myself.
So go on a trek and find them.
Sort of, yeah. Go and discover what's happening here.
What's going on.
Yeah. And I also began to feel like maybe I hadn't completed the process of passing. So maybe I had somehow kind of left my body but not actually entered the next stage, if that makes sense.
So sort of in some quasi-middle area,
Yes. So I did sort of look back to the earth, if that makes sense, to try to, and I could confirm, no, I'm definitely,
so did you
my
come
body
back
is
to
gone.
Physically as well? Like you actually came back and confirmed your death?
Yeah.
Saw your
Observation.
body in the ground?
Oh, it wasn't in the ground, it was gone. Yeah. And so I confirmed, yes, that had happened. But at this stage I had very little understanding of really where I was and what was happening, so it wasn't a very sophisticated. I realised I could do that, I did that, but I didn't really stay around the earth because I was really anticipating my next existence. I needed to get that happening. So I was sort of drawn back to this place where I had arrived, seemingly not really in my control. Again, I didn't really understand how things worked at that time, but when I wondered, well, have I not died then? Am I in a coma or something? And I came back to the earth and I could see, no, my passing had been signified. It had, all the rituals and everything had been observed.
Yeah. Family all believed you had gone.
Yep. And it was more important to me that all of the rituals associated with our faith had been observed.
Yes, gotcha. Because you felt that those rituals needed to be observed in order for reincarnation to occur as well.
Yep. And once I'd done that, then I understand now my desire was fulfilled, and so I was naturally drawn back to the place where I had entered the spirit life.
Yeah.
And at that point, then I decided I needed to go and find out, do I need to go further? Is something missing that I have done?
Seeking answers.
Yeah. So I did actually, you jokingly said about a trek, but it was sort of like that. I decided to start walking in one direction and see what would happen. And in that process, again, I didn't understand that desire was the thing that would bring me more truth or bring about change. But in that process, I began to walk, and I did start to encounter people. And I met some people who were in a similar situation to myself. And then
I was sort of wandering, looking for answers as well.
Yeah. And who had no awareness of where they were or why they were there.
Yeah.
And others who seemed to be, they sort of stopped looking, but they seemed to be in quite a lot of emotional pain and physical pain in some cases, feeling quite lost and hopeless and desperate. And that scared me a great deal because I could feel those feelings beginning to sort of arise in me as well.
Right.
Yeah. So I thought I have to keep looking.
Keep on the trek.
Yes.
Yep. And avoid those feelings.
Yes. Yes. And so I did that, and eventually I reached a place where I felt exhausted. It was like, that didn't happen in a day. That happened, like, I could walk for really, really a long time, but it almost seemed as though the environment began to feel more restricted or closed down, and almost that I couldn't walk further. It was...
which you now also understand.
Yes.
But which you didn't understand then either.
No, I really didn't know what was happening. Of course, now I understand that was because there was restrictions. The environment was restricting me to help me to feel the restriction that was spiritually within me.
Yeah.
And that I couldn't really expend more energy because it really wasn't in me due to the condition that I was in. Yeah. So at that point, I began to start to feel some of, like the
same emotions of the people you walk past.
Yeah. It's just a feeling of dissolution, really, or desolation of what does this mean? Why isn't this thing that I thought was going to happen happening?
And did you feel at the time it was like you were in a strange land that you couldn't understand and couldn't make sense of?
Yeah. And I couldn't really make sense of myself at this point because I had such a strong viewpoint of what would happen, and that this period between leaving my body and returning to the earth would be quite organised, and I had a lot of expectations about how it would go. None of that had happened, and I began to question, well, am I really me then, or am I some part of me where that hasn't happened, and maybe a part of me has gone through that and I'm just what's left over, or am I really dead, or what did I miss? Or it was very, very... So
you started using your mind to come up with philosophies that would explain the position you were in.
And I was very frightened.
Yeah.
I was very frightened of what it all meant. And I tried to find solutions that maybe that's what it meant, but everything that I came up with frightened me further.
Yeah.
Because none of it left me in a good position. the consciousness that I had was somehow not experiencing what I had believed would happen. So what is this? And is this forever? I suppose I began to fear very much that this was a place that I couldn't exit. Yeah.
Sort of became like an emotional nightmare.
Yeah. Very much.
Yeah.
It was sort of an emotional torture in a way.
Yeah.
And I stayed in that state for quite some time because I was always trying to find a solution, and then that would scare me more, and then I'd try to figure something else out and that would scare me. My distress was growing, but I really hadn't surrendered to my situation.
So any of the distress that you were feeling, you weren't really feeling it properly, but every time you tried to seek a new answer, it caused more distress.
Exactly.
And then you're trying to cover that over and seek a new answer, but after a while you also get tired of thinking of new answers, don't you? And,
yeah. So it became an exhaustion, another type of exhaustion, and I eventually exhausted myself, and I began to grieve. I began to grieve that nothing was as I thought it was, and something must have gone terribly wrong, and maybe I was an exclusion.
So you thought maybe it had gone terribly wrong just for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I believe that somehow...
It went all right for all the other people who believed,
yes,
but not you.
But there was some malfunction, and I was now somehow outside of life. I was outside of existence. And it was a great grief, which eventually I felt. And it really was, if I hadn't have gone through that grief, I don't know if I would have ever been able to shift from my belief system, because it really was a breaking down. It felt like of myself. I was so instilled in my beliefs that I couldn't understand myself if I was existing outside of them. And I appeared to be existing outside of them, and so it was a dissolution of everything. It felt like of myself.
So by this stage, you could probably say, couldn't you, that your beliefs had a higher impact on your new emotional state than your old emotional state had? Like what happened to you on Earth had. So in other words, your belief systems caused you to now get into this state. And the false belief systems that you had imbibed on Earth had a big impact on your life, more, even seemingly more than your sin had had.
Yes, although I came to discover a lot of my beliefs on Earth were very sinful.
Correct.
And they had created a part of where I actually entered the spirit world. But how I responded to that environment that I entered was very much governed by my beliefs. And holding on to those beliefs. And then all of the distress that I've really described so far, that was really as a result of the beliefs.
Yeah.
The beliefs were keeping me in a place where I couldn't even reason or understand where I was. So after I allowed that great... I keep calling it a dissolution because that's what it felt like. It felt like a dissolution of every part of me. And after I went through that, it was probably the most, even to this day, I feel like it's the most humble place that I ever experienced in a way. I felt like a baby, but not in a sort of...
So still could see, many of our audience here might not realise, but you still could see yourself in an adult body.
Yes.
And you still felt like you were yourself to some degree. In the
Well,
sense
no,
that
I
you
had a
could
conscious...
recognise your body.
Yes. Yep. This is not a physical process that I'm describing in this sense.
Yeah.
I could see my physical body and all through this, but of course I had this question of like, well, what is this consciousness I'm experiencing? Because, I was aware that when I reincarnated, I would lose consciousness, but I still had consciousness.
Yeah.
So there was something going wrong, and was I split off from my new consciousness, or what was happening? But I felt this baby-like feeling was a very, like everything had been stripped away from me. And I felt quite weak, actually, in that place. I had a lot of judgment of myself in that place, and yet it was a very, it was the beginning, even though I didn't understand it at the time. It was a new beginning.
Beginning of humility for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I had allowed that process to. I still didn't know what to believe, but I knew that something had shifted and that I had to come to understand who I was. This consciousness, this person, this that I still appeared to be. I needed to understand how I fit into the universe, what was actually happening. Yeah.
So what happened then?
People started to come to me to answer that question.
To answer your question.
Yeah.
Because now you had a pure desire to get the question answered.
Yeah.
Before you were afraid of the question answered, the answer, weren't you?
Yeah. Or I see now I wasn't even open to an answer that was outside of what I believed.
Yeah.
You know, it had to fit into my very structured belief system that I'd had on Earth. Otherwise, it would have been like I had deaf ears.
Yeah.
So as people started to come to me, it was quite challenging, because at that time I felt to be not a man, not in a physical sense, but I felt I'd been stripped of all my pride and my knowledge and my sense of
all the things you thought you knew, all the things you felt you knew, all the things you believed about yourself.
Yeah. And that was the first time I really became open to learning something different. But I felt very judgmental of myself still in that place. I felt weak, and I felt ashamed, and I felt...
And did you feel like ashamed even when you were talking to them?
It was very hard for me to talk to them, because I felt so much shame. And again, in hindsight, I see how much my belief system had given me a sense of worth. How I was within the Hindu faith and where I fell, and my belief about how the whole reincarnation cycle works, that had given me a sense of worth and purpose, but predominantly worth. And in hindsight, again, I see how much how fragile my sense of worth was, in a way, because it was based completely on that belief system.
Yeah. So was the caste system prevalent at the time you were on Earth?
Yeah. In not exactly the form it exists now, but yeah. So I felt I was of a sort of a superior caste or class, or and well, I didn't. It's hard to say I felt it. I definitely felt it, but I was born into it.
Yes.
It wasn't
so it was normal for you.
It wasn't a question of something I gained through my life. It was with me my entire Earth life.
But in that process, there was a presumption in you that it meant you were in a good condition already.
Yeah. And that if I followed the precepts of my faith, then I was assured of an even better existence following my life on Earth. So that I was already in a good state, and things should continue to improve.
And what was your definition on Earth of better? What was that? More money, more power, more
comfort,
respect,
more respect, more... again, in hindsight, I see it now as more worth. Just the glorious feeling of having more worth.
In the eyes of society, or even in your own eyes?
Both. Definitely both. Yeah. Because here I was outside of my society and having to let go, or it wasn't as if I just had to make an opening that maybe what I believed was not the truth, or not the case for me. And even just that process caused me to feel absolutely worthless. Yeah.
Okay, so these people had come to you, and you started asking questions.
Yes, from this very ashamed place. So it was tentative at first. And I began to ask them, again, not really the global truth, but just what is happening to me? Why me?
Yeah.
Why isn't the laws of the universe working for me? And they began gently to tell me that it wasn't just me, which caused further confusion. But eventually they could convey that no, I was I wouldn't go back to Earth. That they had also had that belief when they passed, and for some of them they held on to it. Some of them actually had been from a lower caste or class when they passed, and they had actually passed into a brighter location, which was quite good for them. You know.
So they were happy about their new location.
Yeah, and it was easier for them to
recognise the truth,
let go of their beliefs and accept the spirit life, or even to really inhabit the space that they found themselves in. So some of them had even held on to the belief that they might reincarnate, but where they had arrived was quite pleasant, thank you, and they'll stay there for a while. They weren't in any hurry.
They weren't in any hurry to go.
Whereas I had been in quite a hurry. They could. That had helped them, but they'd had slightly different experience. They didn't have to be stripped of their beliefs immediately. They could sort of figure it out in perhaps a less dramatic way than the way I was going through.
And you know now that, for the sake of our audience again, that was because they arrived in a better condition of love than you did.
That's right. And so, which is what we were saying earlier, partly where I had entered the spirit life, part of that darkness was really about the lack of love I'd had and the lack of equality that I'd had for others. The superiority with which I held myself on Earth actually created the darkness that I had entered into. So they began to gently tell me that the truth, that as far as they knew, I wouldn't be returning to the Earth, and that they knew a lot of people who had been in the spirit life for 100, 200 years, and nobody seemed to be returning to the Earth. So that was shocking, utterly shocking to me, and it took me a while to just absorb that as a potential idea, as a reality. But gradually I began to experiment, I suppose, and kind of entertain the idea. And then I began to realise, well, if this is where this is for a long time, this is not very good.
I'm not too happy about where I'm arrived now.
No. I mean, it's just not that nice. It's cold, empty, there's not many people here, there's not much warmth emotionally or physically, and I would like some of that.
So started to develop a desire for those things.
Yeah. And I suppose a more humble attitude that perhaps in that way perhaps parts of my belief system that had told me that maybe there's maybe if I'm not in a great place, it might have something to do with me. The remnants of that kind of maybe helped me to say, okay, well, maybe there's something I need to adjust here. But I was very unprepared for the fact that the adjustment had to do with the way that I had treated others on Earth. So it became an educational process then. And initially, there was spirits who didn't have a relationship with God who were helping me. They were from my same background, and they were helping me to adjust, helping me to learn lessons, just very, very basic lessons like ethics, the equality of all people, and those things. As soon as I started to engage with those lessons, my physical environment improved greatly. So I began to see that, wow, a lot of what I had been believing was actually creating pain and suffering for me in the spirit life, but it had created a lot of pain and suffering for people on Earth. And I'm not sure how much more you want me to say, because...
I think lots more.
Okay. So it began a process of, I guess, two different shifts were happening in me simultaneously. One was about becoming sensitive to love, the natural love, we would call it, just love for humans, and what that meant in not just in principle but in a feeling sense.
So when did it actually click with you that, it's all about my progress in love? When did that?
Good question. It took me some time for it to click emotionally, if that makes sense. So I made that shift intellectually within a couple of years of entering the spirit world, and by that I mean I realised there were certain aspects of behaviour and belief that if they weren't in harmony with basic equality, that was false and needed to be discarded, and that those things that saw the equality and beauty in all people and honoured and valued that, even if just intellectually, that meant progression, and that meant truthfulness.
So at this stage, how did you discard those false beliefs, like the belief that you were... So obviously you entered believing you were superior.
Yeah.
How did you discard the belief you were superior and end up thinking that you're equal?
Yeah, good question. I had very good teachers in that they had come from my same background, and so they could relate to me in a way that I understood easily.
Yeah.
But they took me through a process of, sometimes they would show me visions or images of my life that I'd lived on earth, and how out of harmony with those principles I was. Yeah.
So they sort of triggered your guilt in that regard, like said you were guilty of this.
Yes, showed me and showed me sort of what it was like for other people as a response of in response to my behaviour. And that brought up quite a bit of pain for me. Again, it was sort of a gentle process where they would show me, I would sort of sometimes initially intellectually see, that's not that good, but gradually over the course of months and what became years, I started to connect in my feelings to that I had harmed others. You know, before I entered the spirit life, I really did not feel I had harmed anyone. And this process of coming to see that I had harmed others it took time, but it was quite painful.
In terms of grief, like in terms of grief.
Like a sorrow pain.
Feeling sorry about what you've
done. A repentance, we would call it now. But at that time I didn't understand repentance. And I didn't involve God at this point. I had no concept of a singular God, of God being a loving entity, or
did you still think of the gods you worshipped at this stage, or you'd sort of given up the concept of there being many gods? Or
well, I actually went through a process with the gods that I had worshipped. I described this sort of dissolution kind of period where I just felt like I can't understand anything and I have to look for other things. But of course it wasn't gone from me. It had been with me for over 60 years, these feelings about these gods. And so I had arguments, if you like, emotional arguments inside of myself with these gods. And it was also an emotional process to let those beliefs go.
So were you yelling and screaming at them?
Yes, and why aren't you here, and why didn't you deliver, and I offered this, and why didn't that mean anything? And
I was a good person.
Sort of feeling that I had fulfilled my duty, why weren't they fulfilling theirs to me? And even as my hold of those belief systems sort of weakened, the emotional signature of those things was still inside of me, and so I was still grabbing for the reward, grabbing for the sense of being holy or dutiful, and wanting that feeling, which was never coming. But in that process, gradually, I began to feel maybe that was all untrue.
So all of these gods were not even existing.
Well, I couldn't find any evidence of them, and the people who were teaching me couldn't find any evidence of them. These people who were teaching me were in the second sphere, so they from the development that I am in now, they were quite like they had quite many more lessons in love to learn, but they were very, very precious to me at this time, and I still owe them a debt of gratitude.
They were your rescuers,
Yes,
really, weren't they?
yes.
Yeah.
They helped me out of a great deal of confusion, sorrow, and darkness in a very kind way. Yeah. Of course, I was expecting that if I had done something wrong, things would be very harsh upon me. And you might say that things weren't that pleasant for me, but in the beliefs that I had come from, I expected it to be far worse if I had done something
sort of
wrong.
almost violent.
Yeah. Sort of crushing and
when
violent.
it was sort of like more gentler process, even though it was emotionally difficult.
Yeah.
You were also a bit confused about that as well.
Yes. So I would say it was really 10 years of disorientation, if I had to quantify it in Earth time. It was a gradual process of improvement, and I felt happier, but it was very disorientating because I had been in a very strong structure of belief, and it was gradually being dissolved both intellectually and then emotionally. And intellectually I would have to consider a change, and emotionally there would be a grief or a feeling of injustice or a feeling of wasting of my life in this belief system as well. But eventually I reached a point where I felt, well, this life is obviously forever, or for as
long as you're aware, at least.
As long as I'm aware. People don't seem to pass from this life, and nobody seems to be going back. And so I should just get on with living here. So that's probably the initial transition that I made. And then, of course, some 100 and something years later, I made another transition, which you know about and that you were involved in. So.
Should I ask the audience whether they want to hear that transition as well?
So I had been in the spirit world for now, 100 and something years, and I felt that initially I was very concerned about beyond very basic lessons of ethics and the very fundamental lessons, I suppose, that my initial helpers had helped me to see, and the way that my life and my condition improved in the spirit world was to grow in these aspects of basic loving kindness to others, basic ethical principles towards others.
And in that 132 years, I think it was altogether, by the time, what sphere, looking back now, because you know what spheres are what now, what sphere were you in by the time this new transition was occurring?
So I actually was in the second, sort of towards the top of the second sphere. Yeah.
So you'd already gone through this sort of hellish process, emotionally sort of hellish process, and then over the 130 years made sort of gradual process and obviously the transition between the first and second sphere would have been a significant time in your life as well.
Yep, certainly.
Yep.
Certainly.
And then you've come to the top of this, almost to make the transition into the third sphere.
Yeah. Yep. But the stumbling block for me in this, where I was then, was that I was very reticent to take on new belief systems, if you like. I wasn't really seeking the truth of how it all worked. I just had figured out some basic things of how you get moving, how you can have I began to have relationships again with people, friendships, and I kind of got this going. But then I wasn't really seeking more truth.
Is that because you were frightened of the prior experience?
Correct. Yeah, because I was very frightened of still holding that fear of that dissolution process I had to go through, where I felt like everything that held me safe and secure and understanding in the world had gone from me, and I still felt a lot of judgment for the place that I ended up in, and the fear of this disorientation again.
Yeah. So you're worried that it was going to occur again at some point in the future.
I was.
Yeah.
And so I reached a point where it's interesting to describe in the spirit life when you do grow in love, and you have sort of, I suppose, a feeling of being okay with change, and a natural desire to have an improvement in your situation. There is a pull that starts to happen on you as you're growing. Even though I wasn't seeking, I certainly wanted to improve my condition and state where I was, and so it was just a gradual building over these 100 years. And so as I was reaching near it, of course in the spirit world you don't measure, where am I in the sphere and all that stuff, but as I was nearing this transition at the top of the second sphere, I started to feel quite distressed, actually. And at first I didn't understand why, and I felt I was sort of drawn forward, but I felt for the first time really that there was a fear there. There was a fear about going forward, and I actually found myself almost degrading again. It felt like, if I don't, there's something is happening here, and maybe I'm going to go back down. And that then became a fear as well, because from where I'd come from to where I was so magnificently different. I didn't want to re-experience what I felt was the hell and terrible trauma of my passing again. And so I began to talk to other people about this, and I sometimes was isolating myself as well, and like feeling very worried and not understanding why. But eventually it didn't take actually that long for someone to come and talk to me and just remind me of that experience in my passing, and of this sort of dissolution grief, if you like. It was actually, I see now from really God's love and guidance, that someone came to ask me, someone who had also been a Hindu on earth, came to ask me about what happened when you passed. And now I understand that was really a guidance to help remind me of what had happened.
And that's how you progress in the future.
Yes, and also that I hadn't really dealt with this terrible fear of, really, I feared understanding how the universe works in case I felt that I understood it and I had to let go of that understanding again. And so it took me into quite a deep emotional process where not only did I feel the fear of that happening again, eventually I came out of it and I thought, well, even if that has to happen again, I still want to move forward and I still want to know more.
So your faith started to grow, that actually improvement was still possible. Improvement was possible, and that even if I sought out the truth of how things worked and I had to modify that again, that I would cope with that would be okay, and that I would never give up the principles that I'd already learned. But I had to go through the fear. Before I went through the fear, it felt like, no, I can't possibly take on another structured belief about anything. And if I have to let it go, it would be the end of me. But after I felt the fear, I thought, no, I know now more than I did when I lived on earth. And I know certain things are true. Love is true, and love can be trusted. And so as long as I never let go of that, things shouldn't be as bad as they ever were. And at that point, I really began to ask, and I consider that my first prayer, really. I began to ask, what is the truth? The truth, and I really wanted to know all the truth at that point, because I didn't want to go through getting it wrong and then having to adjust. I knew I could do that if I had to, but I didn't want to have to. So I thought, let's just get the whole truth and get it right.
Yes.
Second time now.
And of course that deep desire really became a longing to God. So it's really a precious memory because it was my first prayer. And immediately, some wonderful people came to me, including yourself, to tell me the truth. That God exists and that I could have this relationship with God, and in fact that I could receive God's love, and that if I continued in that longing that I have, that I could progress eternally and become very, very happy. And that's the decision I made.
So in that process too, you had to learn some things about prayer and about what it meant to have a desire and these kind of things. But that must have been a lot easier than what you had to learn up until that point, though.
Yeah, of course, of course. Well, and it was better. It was better than I thought it was going to be. Actually, the whole truth was. It delivered so much freedom to me. I felt like, wow. I feel like I've already faced such immense pain, and I never want to recreate that by treating people badly. And now there's this really quick way to know if I'm treating people badly, and that's to long for God's love, let God's love enter me, and that makes me sensitive to whenever I'm out of harmony with that with somebody else. And as you can imagine, after my experience, that my treatment of others, something I'd never considered on earth, became so important to me. And so,
Now, in this whole story, you haven't mentioned anything about family members.
Yep.
So, just for the sake of our audience, what in the 130 years did you get to see many of your family members? Did you meet up with them when they passed, or what happened there?
Yeah, well, initially, I was very, it took time, as I was saying, if we go right back to when I first passed, it took time for me to really emotionally give up all these belief systems and to understand that my experience or the laws governing my passing were the same as everyone else's. So initially, my wife passed after me, but I didn't see her at her passing. I didn't greet her. I was very involved in trying to figure this thing out for myself. And I also still had these strange kind of ideas that maybe it would be different for her at that stage, which was quite a bit, you know.
At the time she passed.
Yes, yeah. So I sort of ignored her, which was something that I had to deal with later as well. That was very unkind of me. Yeah. By the time my children started to pass, I had begun to visit my wife, who actually entered a very similar state to myself, and that I could begin to help her in her progression. And then as our children, and there was also nieces and nephews, and as people began to pass, and as you know, this has become quite a lot of my work in the spirit world, is helping people with these belief systems when they pass. To this day, I'm still helping people with these belief systems in the many forms that they exist on the earth. I'm greeting them as they pass and trying to assist them to see the truth of what is available to them, and that reincarnation is not possible. Yeah. And obviously the people who have a more elevated viewpoint of themselves pass into a darker condition. So that's people within the caste system in the Hindu faith, but also many Westerners with the belief in reincarnation also have an elevated opinion of themselves and their condition. And so often I'm meeting people from all over the world as they pass to try to assist them. Yeah.
And what sphere do you live in now?
I'm in the 9th sphere now. Yeah.
Should we let the audience ask a few questions if they want to? Anyone want to ask? Or stunned silence? We're okay if you don't want to. Makes sense.
What did you learn about the damage that the belief in reincarnation does for people?
Yeah, it's something that there's so many damages, I suppose, and it's something that I really took time after I found my relationship with God to really almost dedicate myself to studying for a time, because I felt that it was really important in helping the people that I met, but also I've also been involved in trying to inspire change about this belief on Earth as well. So some of the damages are obvious in my story, in that the belief system itself created quite a lot of pain and quite a lot of confusion, and that is very common for people passing still. I also saw that it still encourages, as I know Jesus spoke to you about yesterday, the issue of spirit influence on the earth and spirit overcloaking, where people who sometimes they pass into a region between the hells and into the first sphere where things are not really terrible. They don't go through the process, like an organized process when they pass, but they think, well, I can return to the earth, and they come back and they try to attach to babies or small children and have life through those people. A lot of gender confusion on earth is created through those experiences as well, which is as there's less protection from parents towards children on earth, spiritually speaking, a lot more of that can occur as well. The permissiveness in parenting contributes to that, as well as the belief in reincarnation. There's also this idea that one's circumstance in life is a reflection of their worth or goodness, if you like, which is very inherent in all the beliefs about reincarnation, and that somehow we are either being rewarded or we have to repay some past sin that is not remembered, is a very it's a way of disassociating people from their current soul condition, and it's a way of disempowering people to make soul changes in their earth life, because there's a tendency to believe that, well, this is my lot and it's because of something else, and not to be empowered to change or to see that other people's lack of love is creating a suffering as well. It also creates the issue where people feel desensitized to other people's suffering, because they think, well, that person is repaying something they did in a past life, and so therefore I shouldn't act to alleviate that. I'm saying that in a very concrete way. Obviously, some people wouldn't maybe verbalize that, but inherent in the belief is this kind of flavor, where we can distance ourselves from the lives of others because they're acting out or repaying or being rewarded for something they did in the past.
Being rewarded or punished.
Yeah,
one of the two things.
I was told that the amount of child abuse I've had in this life was my fault. That it was because I'd done something terrible before.
Yeah.
Which at the time is a devastating, awful emotion.
Yes.
I was already in a blame state anyway. So
that's right. Yeah.
That's right. And it's also very disempowering because you have no knowledge of that previous life. So supposedly, the belief is saying that you're completely disempowered in that way as well, that you just have to really suffer and blame yourself because of that past life that you can't even remember. So yeah, that's a great example of what I'm referring to, and the fact that someone could say that to you and not feel the devastating impact that would have upon you is part of the problem of them also holding that belief.
There's a lot of illogical thinking in this belief as well. Like, you come back, you forget what you've learned, you go back without remembering what you've learned, which was what started to make me question it when I was involved in it. Was, hang on, and I remember reading Neil Donald Walsh, who said he'd had 569 lives, and I could still feel through the book I was reading that he had a lot of issues with women, and I remember thinking, I haven't sorted that out yet. Like, how many lives do you have to have?
To sort something out.
So,
And it's also very disconnecting for people from God and from the reality of the spirit life. And I have seen in my experience people waste many years that would have been otherwise productive in terms of their growth in the spirit life, either trying to return to the earth ineffectually, and understanding is ineffectual, and trying all different ways, or being in a prolonged state similar to the one that I was in, of feeling absolutely devastated and confused, feeling that their life was a waste, feeling that they're not sure what to do next. And all of that time could have been spent in growth and change if there was more of an open belief about what would happen when they passed, or a more truthful belief, of course, which is what I try to give people now on earth.
So it undermines the value of spirit life. Yeah, completely. And I was.
Can you stop telling your story?
Yeah,
it's
I
about
will.
us.
Sorry, yeah, no, that's fine.
I feel that.
Let's go up back, and then we'll go across to. So right at the back. Keep your hand up at the back.
So in the last 2 years, I lost 4 members of my family. So obviously I got to be very busy with the other world. And first of all, I found myself, because it's one after the other, with the difference of 6 months, really trying to help them to proceed. I was doing a lot of, it was my thing.
So you're worried about them?
Yeah.
Yep.
Same as I was on Earth.
When they were on Earth, yeah, okay.
But it took a different, and then I started to feel more connecting in an intuitive way. Didn't know sometimes.
But what is your question for him?
So my question is, first of all, are we able to help our loved ones when they pass away? This is the first question.
Mm-hmm.
And the second question is, are they helping us?
Well, a lot of the answer to both questions relates to your soul condition. And I know Jesus has been educating you about aspects of your soul condition for the last few days. But it's whether you can help them or they can help you is very dependent on the amount of love that they have within them, that either party has within them, and the amount of truth that you know, and the amount of faith that you have, and your willingness to feel what you feel and not try to draw the other into your avoidance of feeling. So many times what I observe when people pass from the earth, there's unresolved issues in the relationships, and oftentimes those things are stirred up at the time of passing for both parties, particularly for the people who are left on earth, because of course the people who are left on earth, their life continues more or less unchanged, just with the absence of that person, whereas the person who passes is undergoing quite a lot of changes.
Massive
and that they take the issues from that relationship with them into the spirit life, but they don't necessarily deal with them immediately. But if the person on earth is feeling needy towards that person, or feeling they can't live without that person, or feeling overly concerned in a fearful way about that person, depending on their condition of love and truth, may be drawn back to the earth to try to reassure the grieving party on earth. So that's something I commonly see happening. So sometimes when people say they're grieving for a person, they're actually very needy for the person to come back. In your case, I feel it's a little different from what I can observe in your spirit body. There are issues of responsibility that you have that are causing you to be more engrossed in them, and feeling that you do want them to move forward in their spirit life, but you do feel that you are more advanced in love than them, and therefore a better guide than perhaps the guides that they will receive in the spirit world. So one of the best things you can do to help a person who passes is to pray for them, to ask for God's standard of love for them and God's guidance, if you like, because God assigns a guide to people who wish to grow and progress in the spirit world, and God's laws provide a lot of assistance. So the key thing is working on your condition of love and truth, and then you can very much help them. And you do help people who have passed. To some degree, you help them even by dealing with your own issues, because many people who pass initially are still very interested in the earth, and if they witness you dealing with your pain and being able to do that, that often helps them to not only feel free of any attachment you have to them, but also to feel that perhaps they can feel their stored pain as well.
Yeah, your second question was, you asked, do they help you as well?
Yes, and
I
that.
feel so.
Yeah, well, often they're very interested in your life. The key thing is that you don't. It takes time after a person passes for them to adjust to their new experience. So if you think about my story, there was quite a lot of adjustment that had to happen. And if I had have been very drawn back to the earth in terms of being interested in my family's life and engrossed in how they were feeling or their decisions, at that time it would have really delayed the very significant changes that I made that really helped me to really flourish. So the key thing is to not be needy with the people who have passed. We all, those of us who've passed, definitely take an interest in those people who are still on earth, but the quality of that interest depends a lot on our condition of love. So sometimes if we haven't progressed very much, we might take an interest in your life, but it might be out of arrogance, where we think, oh, you should make this decision or you should make that decision, and not necessarily out of the best thing for your long-term welfare. More about having our selfish, unfulfilled desires fulfilled through you on earth. But the more that someone progresses in their spirit life, especially with God, but even just in natural love, the more they'll be able to visit you and offer you love, and you'll feel that. And also you'll be able to talk to them very easily, which you sometimes do anyway.
Pierre, can we go to Pierre? There's a few people and I want to get this questions.
Thank you.
I have a few questions, but I will just ask one or two if I can. When you first passed and there was all this pain and you felt lost, how many years did it take you to get into a place when you decided to have help and that things changed?
It was kind of a gradual process. And again, it's like maybe it was. So within a year, I started to receive help. But really, the great big dissolution grief, that took longer, you know. But your question is a little bit personally motivated, isn't it? About your own changes.
It's also to give an idea for everybody. When we are in these states, how long it can take?
I would say 10 years or so, really, for me to really sincerely engage with the assistance that was offered. But I also see people in much, like some people spend 100 years without seeking any assistance. I think it was such a dramatic contrast between what I expected would happen and what happened, that in some ways that helped me to reach the desperate state quicker than a lot of other people. Yeah.
So you were quite rapid in your case, among similar cases.
Yeah, I would say so.
And the second part, if I can ask, is what could we do with people similar to you that believe very much, like very strongly in reincarnation, because it's a culture? Is it possible to do something to make them change their minds in some way, in a loving way, I mean?
Well, in a loving way, you must respect everybody's free will. Yeah. And I would beware of your arrogance of thinking that you understand everything before you experience it. And by that I don't mean that, like, reincarnation definitely doesn't exist, but I mean that the process of giving up a belief is very emotional, as my example demonstrated. And that's the same for people on Earth. And really the most important work you can do is to bring your beliefs in harmony with God's, and you'll feel a lot more love for everyone regardless of their belief, and you won't feel it's your responsibility to change anyone's belief.
Let's go behind on this side, so back there, and on this side.
Thank you. It's a personal question. While you were speaking and you were describing the state in which you were after passing, I felt a huge heaviness, because in some way it actually feels like I'm at times already living that while on Earth, and I'm not fully sure where it comes from, because it's not like I've had big abuse or anything horrible happen to me. And also, as you continued speaking, that thing started lifting, and there was like a sense of relief. So my question is, what's going on?
What's going on? Yeah. It's a good question. Yeah. Partly you're quite sensitive to what I'm sort of reliving with you, and so when I describe my relief, you could feel the relief. But the first thing that you were describing, where you felt quite close to the experience that I first encountered, that emptiness and the sort of loss of faith and belief and loneliness, these are things that are within you, and it's important for you to discover the roots of those things. Some of them are based very much on your feelings about having your current belief system, or your feeling of sadness and fear about changing in your current belief systems. But some of it also relates to a very kind of lonely, empty feeling you felt in childhood. Yeah. So they're all things for you. The wonderful thing about, and I've found this time and again in the spirit world, the wonderful thing about really sharing our experiences, similar to the fellow who came to me and asked me about my passing, and that when I was in the second sphere, and that really helped me to connect to what I hadn't dealt with in leaving the first sphere, and then transitioning into the third sphere. When people talk about things and you have an emotional response to them, it's a very valuable thing to help you to explore that deeper, because and certainly you have spirits around you who are feeling very lost as well, and wondering, what should I do? How should I believe? I'm scared to believe something that's wrong. So a lot of the feelings that I experienced when I was experiencing them, describing them, the spirits around you started to experience those feelings, and that impressed upon you, but it does resonate with some feelings that you also have, and so quite a good experience for you in that way, but will just require a bit of effort now to explore those feelings in yourself, but also to become aware of the spirits around you. Some of these spirits have been drawn to you because you're sort of seeking in your own life, and they're seeking, but the problem is they're using you in that way. They want, rather than they themselves find the truth for themselves. They're perfectly able to in the condition that they are. And there's many spirits here today actually who came with me to help spirits who are looking and feeling lost. The problem that you're having is that they are impressing their feelings upon you and pressuring you to figure it out rather than they take that initiative. But that's also resonating with some feelings of sadness and worry that you have in yourself as well. And you're feeling like you want to alleviate the feeling for them and for yourself. Yeah.
It's important for you to understand that their pressure of you is because they actually want to avoid going through the experience that
that I went through.
Who's gone through.
Yeah.
I actually, can I just add, that's my bigger question. I actually get to a state where I don't want to live anymore.
Yeah.
And I feel like part of it is not mine, but I don't know what to do.
Well, that is true.
That's true.
That is true.
That's very true. Yeah.
Obviously, you don't want to act upon it.
No, and it's important to just become aware that you have a lot of spirits around you who feel very hopeless, and and I'm speaking to them as much as to yourself now. It's important for them to take more responsibility for their own feelings. Stop impressing them upon yourself, or really what they're impressing upon you is take away this feeling for me, take away this feeling for me.
Or share it, and if we share it, it'll dissipate.
It'll be lesser, which is really like saying you take it on. The problem that you're having is that you're feeling like you should take it on out of avoidance of some of your own loneliness. You're willing to take on the feelings of others or not have any boundary about people around you and what that they can sort of impress on you, because you feel quite needy to have people around you. So there's feelings of neediness for yourself to deal with, but it's also for them to start seeking solutions for themselves. Yeah.
That's good. And we go over here. That mic can go to... So let's go here first.
Hi. I'm feeling a bit scared about asking this question. So this is a bit my quest now, and I would like to ask for clarification maybe. I've had many teachings on how to process anger, and I feel a bit lost. I would like to know from your point of view, I don't know if it's the same in the spirit world or here on earth, the way we should process anger. I'm just like this idea of like...
He understands your question.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Well, as I shared, I had a lot of anger in my history and when I first passed, but I found in hindsight a lot of my anger was me raging or trying to alter a restriction that was already in place upon me, rather than grieve the restriction. My rage was an attempt to move the restriction, or really the law that God had created that was governing my experience. My rage was an attempt to shift that law, if you like. Shift the boundary that was there. And of course at the time I wasn't thinking I was raging at God, I was raging at all the other gods and at myself sometimes and at the situation. But I suppose the process helped me by allowing the anger. It helped me to recognize that it was futile. That nothing was changing as a result of my anger. But it really did very little else for me. The restriction was still there, my unhappiness was still there, and I'd let out like all this anger, but nothing had really changed. And firstly, expressing anger really doesn't change anything. But it was valuable in that it helped me to see the limit that was there and that I didn't want to accept the limit, if that makes sense. And I didn't realize that intellectually until many years later, but just from an emotional process, I was forced towards my fear and my grief because my anger didn't work. It's like a child in a way. I was in this sort of very childlike state of raging and nothing was shifting. And so eventually I exhausted that process and began to feel the other feelings that were inside of me. So for a person on earth, I would say it's very similar. You can have your rage, and in fact, it's better to have it in a responsible manner rather than taking it out on others or taking actions in anger. What I see on earth is that many people still take many actions in anger. Even some of their actions that don't appear to be angry are expressions of rage. And it's better to acknowledge your anger and to express it for yourself away from others, but don't think that it is changing anything very much. It doesn't change the law-based restriction upon you, which is that unless you release your fear and grief, that your life will change, because it won't until those things happen. Even if you have the illusion of change, or you move country, or you change jobs, or you change relationships, you really haven't changed, and your life really hasn't changed. The way that you engage with life hasn't changed until you shift some of those emotions that you're using the anger to try to avoid.
Thank you so much.
And we're over here, and then over there. Let's go to the guys.
Hi, yeah, just one quick question. Yesterday I was sick, but I also felt I was completely overcloaked with spirits, and my body was going through agony. I was in bed with like an animal, roaring with agony, and I sensed that it's from my mother's lineage, and I felt I was in the early stages of a hell rim, and it was just there was just so much grief and helplessness, complete helplessness in it, and it brought a lot of grief, which is really coming out now, the grief, and it helped. The pain left after crying a lot. The pain left the body, but it was like it was coming out of my bones and everything. And I'm wondering, is this helpful or unhelpful for me if this was the lineage of my mother's family that had passed on? I sense that's what it was.
Yeah, there was a couple of things happening. Yeah. So absolutely you do have feelings in you that have come from your mother's lineage, with trauma and violence and really quite extreme grief, that has been passed into you just from your mother. It's very helpful for you to feel that. Partly what happened yesterday, you were right, that there were spirits who are from that lineage who are in a very troubled state in the spirit world, who you feel you call it kind of empathy with, but it's actually a kind of a feeling of wanting to share in or alleviate their pain, and that brings them to you. So sometimes you are experiencing some of their feelings, and there is it's very important that you and they come to understand that that is not helping them, and it's not helping you. You can deal with what's in you now from that traumatic history, and it's very important that they come to understand that they can deal with that. At the moment, they don't feel that they can, and you feel quite distressed on their behalf, but it's important that you establish emotionally within yourself that they can cope with that, and that you need to feel what you have inherited, but from that lineage, but also you need to release this feeling of terrible responsibility for taking away the woman's pain, actually, and taking it on. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's clear.
Hey, what would you recommend to those of us who have what did you say, an elevated opinion of ourselves, to get to that baby stage, to have that experience? I think there's a passage messages from Julius Caesar where he also has seemed to be a similar thing. So yeah.
The devastation state.
Yeah, and to feel like he was just nothing, but then you could like get going from there. Like yeah.
My brother, it's my advice is don't let it get that bad. Don't live your life like Julius and I lived, the other Julius I mean, lived on earth, where you become so entrenched in your belief in superiority that you face devastation when you pass. One of the things that gives you one of the ways you've been injured is that you haven't been encouraged to grow up. And you've been encouraged in this idea that you are quite a special child, if you like, quite a superior child in your upbringing. But now you're bringing that into your adult life. And one of the benefits is that you still have a childlike curiosity about things. The thing that you need to discard is the superiority. And I would encourage you to take the gentle, it's extremely gentle, the circumstances of your life now, to the gentle signals of your superiority. Listen to them, look at them. I had many of them in my life on earth and I completely ignored them. I became I clung to a belief system to help me avoid what were the workings of the conscience. And you have the opportunity and the knowledge now that I only dreamed of having on earth, to engage with the conscience, and you never have to actually experience complete extreme devastation, but you will experience pain about having these beliefs and having acted in these beliefs, certainly. And the devastation that I experienced is probably far beyond what you can actually conceive of emotionally at the moment. And so it might feel like utter devastation to you as it's happening, but it won't be as bad.
Thank you.
My question is kind of similar. Where you, as a person who also feels who has an elevated belief about themselves, you were telling that in the spirit world, people were showing you how you treated others, and that made you change. That made you change.
Well, it helped me to reconnect, I suppose, with the conscience, and it helped me to see a perspective beyond my own. It's something that I really wasn't good at on earth.
So that would need to be a process we could ask our guides to help us with.
Yep.
And was that the only thing that helped you with that belief that you were better than?
No, but I would encourage you to invite your guides to help you to see the things similar to what I saw. There was also, I suppose, the experience of being loved in a very equal way, and that had an impact on me. And because the spirit friends and guides that I have had throughout my life here have had a good love of themselves as well as love of me, that I could never exploit their love of me, which is something that I was used to doing in my superiority, was exploiting people's belief, kind of their regard for me. And because I couldn't do that with the new friends that I had, it was very confronting for me. I could feel that they loved me, but I couldn't get them to do what I wanted. And I could feel that they loved me without putting me above them. And that at times felt like they were putting me down, I suppose. But because they were so steadfast and consistent, that really helped me to change my understanding of what my status was, if you like, that we were all equal. But for yourself, you have the opportunity to long for God's love right now. And that is going to help you so much with understanding emotionally the equality of everyone, yeah, and that will help confront your superior ideas, whatever, however they exist, yeah.
No, I'm sorry. You're too demanding, so then nothing. So we will choose the people who will take the mic.
I would like to understand that I feel you, and it always comes with these tears, and I don't know what these tears are exactly. Is there something that needs to be grieved or?
Yes, yes. You feel my love for you.
Yes.
Yeah. And that triggers a lot of grief about the lack of love that you have experienced in your life, where you've been overlooked and exploited.
Yeah, a lot of people sort of view those feelings as empathy, but actually you're actually getting feelings from the other person that triggers a memory of all the things where you haven't had that love. And so actually it's not actually empathy you're feeling, but rather it's your own hidden, your own suppressed grief that you're feeling.
And I just invite you to ask for our love. There's so many of us who want to love you and who already love you, so please ask.
Yes, I do.
Right, so and then at the back. Yeah, thank you.
Hello. It's about reincarnation. And I have a question because it's really in my mind. When I was a child, my mother was schizophrenic and very, very violent and dangerous.
Yeah.
And I born into it, and I didn't understand why. So I needed an explanation why this happened to me. And so I created the idea. It comforted me. At least there's a reason why this happened to me, and then I can take it because, especially I'm German. So there was a huge collective bad consciousness. It was guilt feelings, So I totally felt like this. I have to pay a huge bill of horrible things I did and whatever in whatever way. And this was much more bearable than to live the injustice towards an innocent child.
Yeah.
This I could not bear.
Yeah.
So I needed this idea.
Yeah.
It's not from a religion thing or whatever. It's from there.
Yeah. I understand, and I understand that a lot of people take on the belief for very, very similar reasons. But it has actually damaged you having that belief. I understand that at the time you felt it was the only way to survive what was a terribly chaotic and troubling and frightening and just traumatic situation. But you're still trying to cope with what that situation was rather than grieve all of the feelings that it was a terrible injustice that happened to you, and it was related to generations of your mother not having the opportunity to deal with her trauma and her addictions that caused her to be want to have the experience of spirits rather than her own, and her willingness to take that out on someone who was very small and very innocent is something that she's still dealing with now. But also there's a lineage there as well of people who were very shut down and very angry and very mediumistic, and this created this situation with your mother So I would encourage you now to really have the courage to grieve the terrible injustice that happened to you. You didn't deserve it, and that I do understand that even feeling that you didn't deserve it or it wasn't part of some reincarnating plan actually connects you to more of your pain, but that is the pain that needs to come out of you for you to really experience yourself in a more free way. So even facing that childhood experience really with courage and dedication will help to open you up to what is the actual truth, similar to what I went through, where I said, well, what is the truth then? After I'd been through my terrible fear and grief, I could then really ask, what is the truth of the universe? And I discovered it was something other than reincarnation, and I knew that for certain then. But I do have compassion for that, but I cannot say that it's even loving, because in a way it helped you. In many ways, it helped you to create a division between yourself and the terrible experience you were having to live through. And that division is not serving you. It's not helped you.
And it's something really good for everybody to remember, is that a lot of beliefs on earth that are false are perpetrated because individuals are trying to avoid their trauma. Not because they're trying to feel it, but rather they're trying to avoid it. And so then we feel very attracted to certain beliefs that help me avoid it. And we've got to take a lot of care of doing this in our future, because if we continue to do this, you'll find that the main motivation you have to accept any belief is just to avoid something, rather than to find out what the truth is, which is, if you think about the pure motivation for any belief is to find out what the truth is. But a false motivation for any belief is just, I want to find a belief and I don't really care what it is, as long as it helps me avoid a feeling. So you just got to take a lot of care with that in terms of your future life. There are so many beliefs on earth that are false, and they are perpetrated because people use them to avoid their feelings. And so your example is a really good example of how that's occurred. Now, at the time you did it, you might have thought it was good for you. But it's very important to see that in the long run, the feelings are still inside. And so the feelings are still having their effect in your life. And that's damaging the rest of your life.
And maybe pass this on to my daughter.
That's right. If you have children, it passes on to them as well. And you end up doing a lot of things even without hardly even knowing you're doing them, in the avoidance of the feelings that you're trying to avoid. And then perpetrating that belief on the next generation. They don't have the same motivation as you to have that belief, but in the end, as you saw in this case, the belief does have an effect on what happens after you pass, because what you believe you think is real, and then it's very hard to give it up. So having a parent get a belief like a Christian belief or a reincarnation belief or some other belief that is false, and then imposing that belief on the child, that child then is going to grow up with these beliefs. And then, of course, when that child passes, what he's going to have to, or she's going to have to undo those beliefs somehow. So it's far better to almost give your child no belief than it is to give them a belief that your beliefs are true. You know?
Yeah, and I've seen many people in a very similar situation to your own, where they've been grappling with, why has this happened to me, and found the teaching of reincarnation as a way of trying to manage the grief and the trauma that they're going through, but actually not seeing that in a way that it's punishing themselves really for their experience. Rather, it assists you to distance yourself from the actual perpetrators of harm. And God's laws really want for everyone. Or they act so that everyone who acts out of harmony with love is made responsible for that. Of course, there's compassion for the decisions that they made as a result of how they were harmed, but everyone is responsible for how they behave and the feelings that they hold on to. So in your case, your mother is held responsible for how she treated you, even if and so are the spirits who acted through her towards you as well. And it's very important. I have to work with people to help them to see that, just as Jesus said that them holding on to this belief of reincarnation is really a way of keeping themselves away from not only their pain, but feeling the gravity of the responsibility of what was done to them, because that often heightens the sense of pain.
Did you see the point of what he's just saying in terms of, if you blame yourself, then can you see in your soul you're basically saying you're to blame for what happened to you, and that is not God's standard of love. God's standard of love is whoever did things to you, they are to blame for what happened to you. You understand the difference? It's very important to see that difference, because by imbibing the teaching of reincarnation, you're really saying, I'm to blame because I did something bad earlier, and something that I don't even know that I did and can't even correct. You can see how unjust the teaching is in that regard, but you're really saying, I'm to blame, and that unfortunately causes the people who did those things to you to feel that they're not to blame. And of course that doesn't help them either, because they need to know they are responsible for what they did.
Yeah. And also I would just like to say that there are many loving spirits who have been through a similar experience to yourself as a child, and a number of them would like to help you to face that experience that you had. Yeah.
And they'll help you through it.
Yeah.
Being established in the Hindu faith as you were, I assume you were familiar with the terms liberation, self-realization, and waking up to your true nature.
Well, yes and no. I think that the Hinduism that I was a part of was far less. We wouldn't have used those terms necessarily, but in part, yes.
So I just wondered what you would say about those now.
As they exist in the Hindu faith now, or as I experienced them, or how they related to my experience on Earth, you mean? Or?
No, more like from you passing and being in the position you are now. What is your understanding of them, or belief, or anything really?
Yeah. Well, certainly I feel far more self-actualized in my relationship with God than I ever could have achieved within the Hindu faith. Those principles are very empty when we consider them in relation to, well, as Jesus has been describing, God's standard of love. The way that they are described and embodied, really. And that's something that I came to learn here in the spirit life, that any belief you have, unless it's embodied, it becomes a set of actions in your life. And many times within all religions, I see this, there's often a set of standards and certain words that are used for behaviours. But when we examine the way people behave, those same ideals are not reflected. So we can't really say the belief is in those things, in self-actualization. Like, that is not a real part of the Hindu faith, because no one actually has the opportunity to self-actualize in practice. But it's something that, people might bandy around, but it's not really something that happens. Yeah, it's difficult to describe what I'm saying now.
you need to be very careful that you don't use a whole heap of words, which in the end, from a soul point of view, are just mumbo-jumbo words being used, so that you can avoid going through emotional experiences. And what we see happen a lot is that in a lot of faiths, they create specific words, like Christian faith creates the word of like faith in Jesus' death. You know, in the Hindu faith, you get things like self-realization, self-activation, you know, and these are modern terms, by the way, not you know, thousands of years ago, they're not terms they used then, but they're modern terms created by people in those faiths to avoid reality for the most part. And in the end, you end up using terminology that you think you understand that has no bearing on reality as how life is experienced or whether love is actually given to others or not. And so in a lot of faiths, and particularly what's present in the New Age faith today, is a very selfish orientation is developing in the New Age faith. It's all about me. I've got to be self-actualized. But actually a lot of your sin is not necessarily about you. It's about how you treat others. Right, so it's more about how you loving others rather than you becoming, you know, fully aware of yourself. And in fact, full awareness of yourself is not actually possible unless you're also at the same time capable of loving others. So and in fact, most of our sins that we commit on earth are due to how we've treated others rather than how we treat ourselves. Most people on earth favour themselves over others. So, and a lot of these words are created to encourage the favour of self over others. And in fact, in that regard, you could say they become sort of like slogans or, you know, what do they call it when everyone gets together and chants mantras? Yeah, to guide one's life into more selfishness. And you've got to be very careful about that. Yeah. All right, well, I think we've asked enough for this time, yes?
Thank you for having me, everybody.
Thank you. And is there any questions you'd like to ask us about that channeling?
Spoke for itself.
Yeah, now, and what time is it?
It's nearly 2 o'clock.
Nearly 2 o'clock. Okay. Well, I think Mary and I have probably had enough for our day, haven't we?
Yeah, I reckon. Do you want to sit and have lunch with everyone, or?
Yeah, I was thinking we might have some lunch now and make our way. One thing I would just like to say in closing, I know this is sort of not a very, like, I usually have some kind of concluding statement for our seminars. But one thing I would like to remind you from his experience is that the reception of God's love started to change his awareness about what was loving and what was not. So while you can receive truth from God through the conscience, which is the truth mechanism that God communicates with you, that truth won't have a lot of significance to you until you can feel love, till you actually go through the experience of love. Once you go through the experience of love, that changes your heart in such a way that you become automatically sensitive to what is true and what is not, and what is loving and what is not. So one of the things I'd like to recommend to you to at least try as an experiment, if you haven't already done so, is to try the experiment of receiving God's love versus thinking about it. Right? So we've talked a lot about principles, right, over the last 3 days, haven't we? We've talked about the principles of love. They are principled. Love can be a principled feeling, a feeling of what's right, what I should do in kindness and things like that can be a principled feeling. But if you truly feel it as God wishes to experience, to have it, you experience it from God, you'll start feeling it like you'll feel like you're God's child, your child who He cares for you. You'll start to feel the personalization of that care, and you'll also feel like God's your friend, trying to help you through life, trying to educate you, trying to benefit your life. He wants to give you gifts. When you start to experience God's love, you also start to experience God's nature. Remember a day or so ago, that question was asked, what is God's nature? And we haven't really gotten to answer that question, have we, because of all the other digressions that we made. But a part of God's nature is that He has the nature that He wants to gift you things. He wants to help you in your life. He wants to guide you through your life's problems and come out the other end. But to do it, you're going to need to start to feel His feelings for you. And once you feel God's feelings for you, you'll then be able to start to feel where any feeling you feel in your own life or in your own self or in others is out of harmony with that love. And that will help you decide. Like remember earlier in answer to Simone's question, we said you can make decisions based on these principles. Well, imagine if the love is actually in your heart in such a way that it's motivating your passions and desires. Can you see you hardly have to think about the principle anymore, because the feeling of this is the loving thing to do will guide your action. And this is something that I forget his name now. Nita. Yeah, that's right. Experienced. Nita experienced when he experienced that transformation. He experienced the transformation of going from having to develop a principled, like work on the principle of what love is. So, they presented him with things like work on the principle of what ethics are. Don't demand of others what you wouldn't do for others. Things like that. That's the principle of ethics. But when you feel love, God's love in your soul, it's like the principle of ethics you don't need anymore, because the love in your soul says, I can't do that unethical thing. I can't, or I have to do this ethical thing. And it also is driven in such a way that it becomes a passion for you to do that thing. So as Nettie mentioned, he is still in the ninth sphere of the spirit world. And by the way, it's such a blissful, beautiful place, the ninth sphere of the spirit world. He's still coming to earth, which you imagine the contrast between where he lives and earth. It's a major, major contrast between those two places. He's still coming to earth because he feels like the love in him now makes him feel like, I want to help all those people who are going to be harmed in the same manner I was. I want to, and he doesn't feel like God's is having to tell him to do it. He wants to do it for himself. So when you first start developing principles, you start going, what is that principle? What does that mean? Try to work it out. Try to intellectually, arrange yourself in such a way that you understand the principle and so forth. But the beauty of receiving God's love is that the principle gets written on your heart in a passionate sort of desiring way, which is what love does. And in that process, God's love entering your heart, it's like the principles of love get written there. And now you don't need to think about them anymore. They become automatic in the way in which you act and the way in which you behave and the choices you make and the decisions you engage. So that's the benefit of receiving God's love, actually receiving God's love into your heart, rather than just talking about God's love or thinking about God's love. Now, that requires, and it's going to, as it did with him, require an emotional, you're going to go through emotions when that happens. You're going to go through changes when that happens. Some of those changes are going to be like, remember the lead up to that experience for Nettie was, he was scared of it. You're going to have some fears to experience, but don't put it off just because of those things. So that is what I'd encourage you to do. No more questions, because otherwise we'll keep going all day. we'd like to thank Mary and I would like to thank you for your time.
It's been lovely to meet.
It was
so
lovely to
many
meet
of you.
so many new
like
faces,
new faces. All of you that we've met.
Yeah.
It's lovely.
And normally we would have a discussion about what our plans are for the future, but we don't really have time for that right now. We may get around to it next week for those people who are. Most of you are probably not going to be here next week, right? Because that's a completely new group, as far as I understand. It's
Yeah.
pretty close
Is anyone
to fully booked.
here next week? Yeah.
Oh, no. A few.
Oh no. Yeah.
Yeah,
There's still some spaces.
I think there's 3 spaces left. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as you saw. This time, a few people generally don't rock up either, so that's a fairly common, unkind, by the way, thing, isn't it? Because every time they book a seat but don't come, it means somebody else who wanted to come can't come. So just remind you that in future, if you come to our events and you can't attend, make sure you cancel your own seat so somebody else can come.
Yeah. We don't really need tickets. Like we don't really. It's just because the spaces are limited. That we have to try to accommodate the space to the amount of people that.
And a lot of times we're hiring venues ourselves, and we need to know how big that venue needs to be for the people who are coming and things like that. That's why we do tickets. But the reality is we'd prefer not to, but it's pretty hard nowadays. If you hire a venue for 50 and 100 people come,
it's pretty tricky.
It's pretty tricky fitting them in.
Can we please thank Yvette and Andy again?
Simone as well for our accommodation.
Kim's not here today. No. But we will cut her. And I know lots of others of you have done little big things like creating events. Lucy did that, and other things to help out Yvette, haven't we? Yeah. So thank you, everyone.
We'd also like to say to you that. We obviously can't do these things without your donations. So there's a red box down on the floor on the way out. If you'd like to donate to us cash, if you don't want to do it with cash, the donation box online is donate.divinetruth.com, and we're happy to receive donations. We use all of these donations just mostly. Well, obviously when we travel we have a lot of expenses, and at the moment we're a bit behind with covering those expenses, but we generally find that usually by the time we've done a trip, usually everything's sort of break even generally. So that's what we're hoping that will happen this trip, and if that does happen, then it obviously allows us to also contemplate our next trip. If there is a huge shortfall from this trip, obviously we've got to wait until we receive enough donations normally before we cover that shortfall, before we can contemplate another trip. But generally what we find is that what we're hoping to do is to do one of these trips every year. So where we spend about 4 to 5 months overseas. Mary and I are sort of changing our life around, so we spend 4 or 5 months overseas every year, or we have the potential of that. Obviously the donations will determine whether it happens or not, but we have the potential of that, and also a couple of months of the year we'll also be going around Australia as well, teaching people there as well, and then we'll have probably 5 months or 5 months or 6 months home where we live. So that's our general plan for the future. We are wanting, the next time we come actually, we're hoping that when it comes to Europe, we'll probably only be visiting Portugal, but it will be probably in the north of Portugal. So it'll be up, sort of probably the bigger events will be at Porto in the north, and that's the area we're sort of looking at the moment. And any smaller things might be at some smaller town sort of outside of Porto, or into the hills, between that and the Spanish border in the north.
We'll see how we go. You never know. We might.
So we're thinking in Europe, and we're not talking here in England. We will visit England next year as well, probably. It may be a shorter location than we spend in Portugal, but a shorter time. But next, we've already found in this visit we've put too much on our plate, and sort of we're doing these events 2 or 3 days every week, and
for 4 months, so it's a bit much.
Yeah, for 4 months, and obviously we also have to get to the next event. So you know, basically after next weekend, our normal run-of-the-mill thing is pack up Sunday, leave Monday, arrive the new place. We have got to travel nearly 4 hours to the new location after we arrive. So we're going to be, it's going to be 8 o'clock at night probably when we arrive. We've got to also get some, food for the next day and get into our accommodation, and then usually we have a day or two rest, and then we're straight into the next event, setting up the next event and so forth. So we're finding that the way we've organised this trip was a bit busy already, and we've only like a third, or not even a third of the way through yet. So next one, we're going to try to visit less locations but spend longer in each location. And what we may find while we're in Portugal is, like, if we sort of choose a location like the north, but if you guys down here, we can come down here for a weekend, like a drive, and do an event here. And we got a bit more flexibility than is what we're looking for.
Yeah. Less flights as well.
Less flights. The flights are not very nice most of the time. We are not the kind of people who love. We don't mind planes, but we don't. Not the kind of people who are doing this for holidays or anything like that. So, our main goal is to share God's truth around the world, and we're going to do as much as we can to do that. But we also need to make sure we look after ourselves in the process, obviously. Yep. Emma, you want to ask?
I just wanted to say...
Mike, if we might. Yes.
I just wanted to say, if people did want to hear more about your future plans, you spoke a lot about it at the previous talks, and they're on YouTube now. So I can put the YouTube channel details. It's at Exposure, and it's got some numbers after it that I'm just going to have to check on my phone. But the audios are going up there and the videos are going up too, so people can watch those for more.
Now, none of this is under Mary and our control, so bear that in mind. A lot of people just help us out, people with video and whatever, and they just put it on their own sites. So just be aware that the stuff that's on our site is what's under our control. So if there's other things on that site, you might have to wade through things that are what Mary and I believe are not true. But obviously, if there's a recording of us, we try to make those recordings as accurate as possible. And for most people, they barely edit them; they just put them up and they allow that. So, what is the actual address?
I can get it off my phone.
You'll get it off your phone, no worries.
At the same time, because that's online, so and Emma has an email list that's reaching the limit of the download.
Correct.
So I will either re-upload hers or mine, although some got wasted.
The problem with email lists is they're so hard to maintain, and the bigger,
to post it all
the further our trip goes on, there's like thousands of people that want to get on the email list, and eventually it's not going to work. So
it would be better if I create some link that where everybody could access
download it from the cloud or something. Sorry?
These talks, and also we did talks in Belgium
and Austria
already in this trip. Yeah. So there's 6.
Now, the audio of these talks will eventually get up on our server, but obviously, when we're travelling, we have a lot of trouble with fast internet and everything else. At the moment, we've got nearly 500 files we've already created, and at the moment there's still 190 of them that I have to upload. So we're not going to get around to getting it on our site possibly until we even get home. So because we're also busy every week, we don't have the time in between to sit down for a day or two and get it all up. So the only way you're going to be able to get it relatively quickly is through these other sites. So if we can just have that site. Yours.
Can I add just it's add exposures 3569.
Yes. That's a YouTube channel.
That's I think Mia's YouTube channel where everything's on. Yeah.
And Nelly, you wanted to say?
And yeah.
You can find it also in Spotify as podcast.
So what's that?
Divine Truth.
So
Spotify.
Yeah. So how do I write that?
SPOTIFY.
Spotify. It's a place where.
And the account is. Yeah. So bear in mind that's not our account.
Yeah, it said that.
A lot of people claim to create accounts on our behalf, and we don't do that. So there's also Facebook accounts saying Divine Truth and other things like that. We don't have any idea who runs them. There's also other accounts purporting to be us messaging people on a daily basis.
We don't have any social media.
We don't have any
apart
social
from
media.
YouTube. We have one YouTube, or we have 4 YouTube channels, but it's all just Divine Truth on YouTube.
Yeah. So bear in mind that if people claim that they're messaging every day, Jesus messaging, that's not us. We've given up trying to sort of police it all, because at the end of the day, there's so many people who are not very loving or kind or truthful, that in the end we'd spend all of our time doing that and no time teaching. So just bear in mind that the actual sites Mary and I are responsible for are divinetruth.com, which is our website, and we have some YouTube accounts which are all Divine Truth,
Divine Truth FAQ, Divine Truth Shorts, and there's a new one, Divine Truth Live as well.
Yeah, which we haven't used. So eventually we will be using these things. Another plan we have is we're just setting up at home a little sort of studio at a person's house. There's a person who we know well who has a home that has a fast internet connection, because we don't have one. And what they've allowed us to do is set up a little studio in their house. So we are sort of expecting in the future that we'll be able to do conversations over the net with you guys via that studio, pre-arranged conversations. But of course that's only when Mary and I are home. And that'll only be probably, it's looking like 5 months of the year. So it'll be our summertime most of the time, which I suppose here means your winter time. What we're planning to probably do in our travels is mostly travel in the summertime, in the northern summertime, with the exception if we visit places in the southern hemisphere, then we might change our arrangements. But when it comes to the northern hemisphere, we just find it's a lot easier and there's a lot less interruption to travel in the summertime. So rather than having to worry about ice and snow and storms and so much, we find that our travel is a bit more easy come by. So that's our hope in the future, is that we will do this regularly. But of course that does depend totally on the generosity of other people as well. So, yeah. Anyway, there are the details. I don't know if there's much else we need to say to you guys, so I'll just finish it now. What's your comment? Yeah, we'll give you one. No comment.
If you are interested in some people are interested in the footage of this event.
Yep.
So there will be. So we'll share the footage on both.
Yep.
And there will be edited version on exposure. We'll send it to exposure. She will edit herself.
Yeah.
Maxine will edit as well on her side, and she will put on YouTube as well on the truth of it all. No.
It's called Maxine Truth and Soul.
Maxine Truth and Soul.
So what's that called again?
YouTube, Maxine Truth and Soul.
Maxine Truth and Soul. So there will be an edited version of this.
And the and is a proper and or?
I think so, yeah.
Is an
I
ampersand?
just changed the name, so I can't, my phone's
Well, it's
on.
no good me sharing it if you don't know the name.
We need to put these all on the back of the whiteboard and just turn it around. Good idea.
So Maxine will check that, and
Good
then
idea.
it will be on Pierre Joseph as well on YouTube.
On where?
Pierre Joseph.
So spelling, Pierre?
Pierre, like
P-I-E-R-E.
Joseph, Joseph. Yes.
So that's a YouTube account as well?
Yes.
Yep.
And they will be this week and the next week.
And the next week?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Jesus, it's a squiggle.
It's an ampersand? Maxine
Yeah, one of them.
and Sol, like that? Yeah. Okay. YouTube account too.
And it's open also a copy on hard drive, so if someone wants to have a copy, brings a computer and have an unedited copy.
And we also ask all the people who
They
video
will be-
to give us a copy.
Yes.
Because that way eventually we can also share it on our website.
Yeah.
So that's part of the requirement that we have of all people videoing.
Yeah.
And so hopefully in amongst all of those things, you might get to see it again. And we'll see some of you next week, eh? 2 days next week though, not 3 days. We need the Sunday to pack up. So. Yeah.